The senator from Connecticut.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I've been paying attention to my social media feed, and I've seen that senators on the Republican side are starting to announce which way they're voting. I saw that Corker's a no and Collins is a yes, and I don't know what they're a no or a yes on. How can you declare which way you're going to vote on a bill that you haven't read, on a bill that your constituents haven't seen? Senator Wyden just piled up what looked to be about 6 inches worth of text in front of the Senate floor. There is no possible way that any member of this body has read all of that. There is no way that in the time between it is released to senators and when we vote, anyone, even from the really close states, are going to be able to get back to their constituents and ask them what they think about this piece of legislation. I guess I would say I've never seen anything like it, but we just went through it earlier this year, in which we were given about an hour to look at a complete reform of 1/6 of the American economy, the healthcare system, and we are now being asked to vote this evening on a multi-trillion-dollar reform of our tax code, and not a single U.S. senator will have read it. There's no way you would have read it, because I just saw how big it is. Maybe Republicans have read it, because they've seen it in these secret negotiations, but I can guarantee you Senate Democrats will not have read this, because we have been kept out of the loop on all of these negotiations designed to get to 50 votes, not to 60 votes, not to 70 votes, not a consensus product that could get Republican and Democratic support. I got here in 2007 when Democrats took control of the House and the Senate. And I remember during those 2 years all sorts of consternation from Republicans about how bills were being rushed through the process. And so in reaction to that, when Republicans took back control of the House, they instituted something called the 72-hour rule, that you couldn't vote on a piece of legislation unless members had been able to see it for 72 hours. We need a 72-minute rule. I don't think that we are going to be able to look at this legislation for more than 72 minutes, a multi-trillion-dollar reform of the U.S. tax code, before we are asked to vote on it. Senator Wyden and others have been waving around this list of lobbyist-asked-for amendments that fills up an entire page. We're not going to get 72 minutes to look at this, never mind have a single conversation with our constituents. It's dark out. The bill's going to be introduced on a Friday night. We're going to vote on it overnight. This is supposed to be the world's greatest deliberative body. It's not supposed to work like this. And it's not a middle-class tax cut. I'm not going to deny you that there are some people in the middle class who are going to get their taxes lowered by this bill. But the middle-class tax cuts here are temporary, and they're very selective. They're selective in a way that very peculiarly seems to discriminate against Democratic states. So the states that are represented by Democrats don't get as big a tax cut out of this, because it's been crafted in a way that hurts states like mine that utilize the state and local tax deduction more than other states. Those other states happen to be represented by Republicans. It's not a middle-class tax cut because the middle-class tax cuts are just temporary. They go away after 7 years. The corporate tax cuts, the inheritance tax cut for billionaires, those are permanent. Those go through the full 10-year time frame, but middle-class families don't get permanence. After 7 years, 6 out of 10 middle-class families will have their taxes go up, not down. And that 7-year time frame is an important one, because by repealing the individual mandate, premiums go up by 10% a year. Republicans have been screaming about premiums going up, and they decided intentionally to put a provision in this bill that will guarantee that premiums will continue to go up at 10% a year. Guess what happens on year 7? Year 7 is when that 10% increase year by year compounds such that premiums are doubled. So in year 7, this is a great deal if you're a middle-class taxpayer. Your tax cut, to the extent it exists in this bill, disappears, and your health care premium is doubled. What it is a big tax cut for the wealthy. I'm stealing Senator Bennett's chart here, but he did it really well, right? You have 572,000 taxpayers, the richest 500,000 Americans, getting $34 billion in tax cuts. And then you have 90 million taxpayers who are making under $50,000 a year getting $14 billion in tax cuts. Now, I get it that, if you're going to structure a tax cut that covers everybody, naturally people who make more are going to get more. But why does it make sense to borrow $34 billion to help the wealthiest 500,000 Americans? And this doesn't even count the inheritance tax, which is going to help an even smaller percentage of those people even more. And come on, this idea that you can deficit finance a tax cut for the rich and it'll just trickle down and magically result in economic growth, that is just not true. It's a fiction. We have decades of economic experience to tell you that when you cut taxes for the rich, it does not magically result in enough economic growth to make up for the deficits, especially deficits that are going to be in the neighborhood of $2 trillion. You might as well claim that unicorns are real. If you want to believe that Tupac is still alive, go for it, because it's just as plausible as deficit finance tax cuts for the rich resulting in enough economic growth to wipe out the deficits. It's a fiction. It's a fantasy from the beginning. So I think we should take our time, read the bill, have a real conversation about what we are about to do. We could if our goal was to provide a middle-class tax cut, then we could do a much better job if we worked together. This is not a middle-class tax cut for everybody. And after 7 years, the majority of people in the middle class lose that tax cut. There's no reason to borrow this much money for the richest 500,000 Americans. As a senator with 2 young kids, I just don't know why you'd ask my kids and so many others to pay back loans necessary to deliver this tax cut, especially when it isn't going to magically result in the kind of economic growth that trickle-down economists have claimed for years and years. It's not impossible to get a bipartisan tax bill. I know my Republican friends claim, as they did on health care, that there's no goodwill on the Democratic side to try to craft a bipartisan proposal. The tragedy is that you didn't even try. There was no attempt to try to find common ground here, just like there was no attempt to try to find common ground on health care until the bill had failed. And I credit Senator Alexander and Senator Murray for trying to find that common ground after the health care bill failed. But the order switched. Try to find common ground first, and if that fails, do it in a partisan fashion. Instead of doing it in a partisan fashion, and when that fails, try to find common ground. This is a really bad bill, really bad piece of legislation for my constituents. I think, because I will not have read it by the time that I'm forced to vote on it, and neither will any of the other 99 members of this body. I yield the floor.